This is the Doing Scary Things podcast. I'm Katie. I'm a veteran photographer, a serial entrepreneur, an aspiring author, and a relentless optimist. I'm a slow-talking, deep thinker from the Appalachian Mountains.
I'm Anna. I'm a prodigal musician, an accidental psychotherapist, and I'm living life mostly by experiment and endless curiosity. I'm a redheaded speed talker from a Midwestern farm town.
The purpose of this podcast is to talk to people who are doing some pretty scary things in their life about what it takes for them to push past fear and keep themselves going every day.
We'll also unpack the vulnerable things we're pursuing in our own lives and hopefully offer encouragement to you wherever you are on your journey.
Man, that was
brilliant. Thanks for tuning in today. In today's episode, I talked to Katie about the book she's been writing. And at the end, we make a really special announcement, so make sure you listen all the way to the end for our big news. You've written a book, or are writing a book, maybe I should say.
Yes. I'm more comfortable with that pretense.
You're editing your book.
Yes, that's true.
Which is a scary thing, too.
For a process that, who knows how long that's going to take.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Real comfortable with the unknown.
Yep.
So good.
Yep.
But yeah, it feels kind of open-ended, but... it's awesome, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks. You're the only one that's read it so far.
Well, I love it. I'm already recommending it to people when it's not out yet.
It's kind of hard, yeah. If anybody knows a publisher.
If you're hearing this, I'm recommending it to you.
Call me.
You just can't read it yet. But it's coming. It's very close. It's coming.
Thank you, yeah. So, and that was part of the process. I mean, I didn't know anything about what that process is like. Apparently it is very common to write several versions of a book and and then hopefully at some point get people interested in publishing it. And so I'm still very early in the process, but I do have a lot of words. That's how I think of it. But
I have a whole book full of words.
I have a lot of words. But your encouragement has seriously meant so much.
It's near and dear to this whole subject matter, right?
It is. And honestly, when we started talking about doing this podcast, I mean, if anything, it was birthed out of the ideas of the book. The ideas we're kind of breaking down and talking through.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, when I started writing this book, it's taken many shapes, I will say, and you know, the elevator pitch about what it's about isn't perfected yet. But when I started writing it, it was going to be more of an encouragement to other people. If you're pursuing something in an artistic field, you know, it was going to be my advice or whatever. I have this really strong belief that everybody's creative. In my personal life, I am a Christian, I'm a believer, and, you know, if you believe the Bible is true in any form, where does Genesis 1 start? It starts by saying God created the whole world and everything in it, and then he made man in his image.
Right.
So we have the creator of everything says, I made you just like me.
Yeah. First thing you need to know.
First thing.
Yes. Right.
Period. And then, you know, and he goes on and he gives man dominion of, you know, taking care of the land and taking care of the animals. And he even says, like, here's an animal, like, you name it. That's how much I trust you. That's sort of what started shaping this belief. But even more so is like we were talking about earlier, these conversations I was having with people where they were discrediting themselves. I would love to do what you're doing, but I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. I would love to do that if I had been born with that gift.
Right.
And it just became a total excuse, you know? And I'm not saying those people are being lazy, but basically society has taught us that some people were born with talents and some people weren't, and there's no in between. And if you weren't born with a specific talent, then you've got to find something else to do. Instead of teaching us that, honestly, the world is at our fingertips and you're not going to be good the day you start, but you can do it. Like if there is something inside of you that you feel such a connection with, you're probably meant to do that thing, even if it's not easy for a really long time.
Yeah. Well, and chances are, as we've found out for sure, in pursuing those things, even if they have nothing to do with art, you're going to be exercising basically your God-given creativity to make it happen.
Yeah.
I love that part of your message so much too, that just our view of what creativity even means is so narrow, and it's so far away from like the original actual concept.
It's so different. Again, I think creativity is one of the most misunderstood concepts in our world today, and I think it's one of the most misused words.
Yeah.
And I say that because I see people on a daily basis, I see it in people's bios, people qualify themselves as creatives, and what does that tell us? They don't believe everybody else is,
right,
too. So already you're saying, and again, like, I'm not trying to make anybody out to be the bad guy. It's a misunderstanding. But you would never say, like, I have something that you don't. Hopefully, you would never say that intentionally.
Right.
But I believe when people say, I'm creative, that insinuates that not everybody is. I've seen it rip apart churches. I was a part of a church at one point that started a creative Bible study. And you would not believe the amount of hurt and confusion that caused in the congregation of people trying to figure out if they were qualified to go to that Bible study or not. I felt very connected to that message and very strongly about that message, months and years before I even began to write this book. And I'm still in the middle of like, how in the world am I going to get this point across where I don't sound like I'm being judgmental and I don't sound like I have this very narrow worldview? And, it's like, but I really believe it's such an important message. Early on, I sat down with a creativity mentor, and her name is Betsy Garman.
She's the jam.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Betsy.
Yeah, we've both met with her before.
She's probably really proud of us right now as she's listening.
I hope she's listening.
I'm going to imagine that she's so proud of us.
Betsy's got a great way of seeing things and really just saying things bluntly and to the point, and, kind of getting you to think about things a certain way. And so the very first time I met with her, she said two things. She said, you're never going to convince everybody they're creative. And she said, sorry, you probably said it much nicer than this, Betsy, so forgive me, I'm paraphrasing. But she essentially said, what I heard was, you're never going to get people to like think this is interesting or like connect with this unless you tell your own story. She didn't know the ins and outs of my story, but I think
1-2 punch, Betsy.
But I think it was so obvious. Obviously, this comes from deep within me. Like, this comes from years of either watching people be discouraged or, feeling like I can't do the thing or whatever. Yeah. And so it really, in a really weird way that I didn't know when I started, this is my story.
Yeah.
And, I was devastated when I left that meeting because, for one, the whole thing I'm trying to get across is that everybody's creative, and for her to just say that so bluntly, like, you're not going to convince people of that. Her backstory, she's this amazingly talented lifelong artist, and I think both of her siblings are like lawyers, and they don't understand her, and her husband's a musician, and it's just these two very different worlds, and that's the real world we live in,
right?
Of like, I'm sure people with in other career fields look at artists all the time and they're like, get a real job, what are you doing?
Yes.
And it's just this back and forth, right? And that's all the more to my point is like, I hate things that divide us as humans.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes down to it, we are all the same. Like, we want the same things.
Yeah.
We're making decisions and we're striving to get to where we want to get to, but we want the same things.
Well, especially when the things that divide us so paradoxically are the things that do make us all human, like being creative.
Yeah.
It's like, that should be the last thing that divides us, but it's a huge divider.
And so I start writing this book, and, I'm doing my research, and, the definition of creativity is problem solving. Like, you can't tell me that you have to be an artist to problem solve. A brain surgeon, how many times do you problem solve in a surgery? Like, I keep harping on that one, but I made up this story in my book because it sounded so ironic to me at the time, and yet I know that it's happened. But it's like the little kid who got discouraged from becoming an accountant because his mom told him it was going to be too hard. There's a million reasons not to do anything, but it's not because you're not creative.
Right.
It's not because you're not good enough. And so that's really the message of the book. And like I said, I didn't know it was going to be about me. I didn't want it to be about me.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to even go there. But at the end of the day, I felt like it was necessary. And so, parts of my story are interwoven throughout it. I would say I probably got about halfway through the book, and it was getting to the point where I was, talking in the book about the fact that me and you have been writing songs.
No big deal.
And we've done it pretty consistently. And I literally had this moment, for lack of a better word. I just realized I'm going to have to actually show people these songs. Like, if I'm admitting that this is my story and this is why I feel so strongly about all this, I have to tell people what I've been doing with my time, you know? And the songs deserve this, you know? And we deserve it. We deserve to have these out in the world. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of them. Like, we're doing this for us. That's part of the story.
Like you were saying earlier, maybe just writing good songs and enjoying them ourselves, is enough. But there's something about putting them out into the world.
Well, and it's probably believing, again, it's still this struggle of believing that I have the right to do this. My husband and my closest friends are professional musicians, and I'm a beginner, and I have to say that and live with that. But I have the right to begin just like they did whenever it was. And it wasn't the same year, and it wasn't the same time, and our stories look differently, but this is not something that I have to keep myself from, because if I did, I'm the only one that's getting punished, really.
Right.
It's not affecting anybody else.
Right. I feel like a lot of our experience actually doing the scary thing together has been getting out of our own way. We're still getting out of our own way.
We still are. It's so ironic. But and I think that's a very universal theme. And I'm looking forward to being able to interview more people on the podcast and hear, what things have been scary to them, because we know it's going to be different across the board.
Right. But it's like the proof is in the pudding, and hearing, just like you're saying about having your own personal story in your book, like hearing from individual real people in their real lives and their real story is so powerful.
It helps you realize that you're not alone. And that's so powerful. Yeah, I believe in the power of telling stories. If I'm going to be really honest about it, to me, that's what the Bible is. Like, we're just reading about people's stories. And, anybody who's read it knows these are not perfect people. And that's the age-old debate, right? Of like, why are we reading about this guy? Like, he cheated on his wife and, blah, blah, blah. Like, but it's like, that's the humanity of it.
Yeah.
And if we can be modern day, storytellers, like telling our stories along the way, I think there's huge value in that.
Yeah, totally. We've been very meta so far. We've been talking about telling our stories, but there's a pretty significant part of our story that we have not yet told you.
There's a secret we've been keeping.
Really, there is. Do you want to tell them?
You can tell them.
We're a secret rock band. So ridiculous.
Surprise! We're a secret rock band.
Surprise. We're a secret rock band.
Surprise.
I guess technically it was a secret rock band because we just told all of you. But it's called Jasper and Jade. Before you ask, no, one of us is not Jasper and the other one is not Jade. But
although your hair kind of is a Jasper-y shade.
I might have red hair and you might have green eyes, but that has nothing to do with it. It's just a coincidence. But that doesn't mean that our name doesn't have meaning behind it. So I wanted to ask you about that, Katie, because as I recall, we really toiled over trying to figure out what the right name for us was, because doing this scary thing together meant so much to us and still does. And so we knew it had to be right. So I want to hear your recollection of that process.
Well, the way I remember it was probably about a year before me and you started writing together. I had really come to a crossroads in my life. I, up to that point, had pretty much been a workaholic. I had checked out for a few years. I'm sure we'll talk about that more on a future episode at some point. But I got to this place where work wasn't completely satisfying me anymore, and it really brought me to a place of contemplation. And I realized that when I tried to think about my identity and I tried to think about who I was as a person, everything I would have listed up until that point were work-related attributes, or they were things that I had accomplished. And I realized that that actually wasn't my identity at all, but it was really scary because I started trying to think about who I was, and I couldn't think of something offhand.
Yeah, like when you strip all those things away,
what do you have?
Like, what's left? Yeah. That's so true. If you go to a party and meet someone, what's the first thing they ask you? Mm-hmm. What do you do?
What do you do?
And really, they want to know who you are, but how do you answer that? You know, what do you do is an easy and more concrete question, but it winds up getting so entangled with our identities, for better or worse, you know?
Totally.
So you were in a very normal boat.
Good. That's good to hear.
Dealing with that.
Because I saw it as a crisis, but whatever.
Well, it kind of is.
Yeah. And so I felt completely hopeless in that moment. I didn't know, it was just kind of a sheer moment of panic, of like realizing that I couldn't say one thing about myself that didn't have to do with something I did. And so I just started praying because I really had no answers. And I just started asking God to show me what my identity was. And immediately, this might sound unusual to some people, but immediately I just started seeing pictures of gemstones, and for lack of a better word, I started hearing these words in my head. So I heard like rubies and diamonds and Jasper and Jade. And to be honest, I wasn't really super familiar with what Jasper was. I remember going and Googling it, and I was pretty sure I had, I knew Jade was like kind of like a darker greenish gemstone. But then, like I said, I looked it up on the internet and realized that Jasper was sort of this really pretty red gemstone. And, did some more research about those, but it just always stuck in my mind, Jasper and Jade. And I just thought that sounded really catchy. But the more you think about it, like those are complementary colors. Like they're very different, but they complement each other on the color wheel. And so when we were starting to write songs together and starting to even let ourselves dream that this could ever even be a project of sorts, I remember coming to you with that story and just saying, like, what do you think about this? Because I think it sounds kind of cool.
I feel like more than we could have even possibly realized at the time, the nature and relationship of Jasper and Jade to each other and what they stand for and what they mean, and the complementariness of them has represented us so well, Like you said, we were just at the beginning of letting ourselves dream about this kind of being an actual thing. It's just like so cool how we've really come in to fit that. How it's turned out that it's really fit us all along, and it's just becoming more obvious. We've been songwriting together for 3 years. This year, well, really starting last year, we recorded a song. This year we were like, holy crap, we got to do more of this. And we recorded 5 more songs.
We did. So we recorded that first song as an experiment.
Yes.
As everything we did.
And it turned out shockingly good. We were like, no.
Okay, but that tells you so much of what we were even like anticipating. That yes. I guess we were just expecting it to go bad, or we weren't expecting to want to do another one or something. Because it was like, it went really well. And then we were like, oh,
we were at least
now what?
We were at least leaving equal room for it to not be what we
Yeah.
wanted. And it was actually it was beyond what we wanted. We were like, wow, this came to
then
life.
We were like, cool.
Yep. Super cool.
And life, got kind of in the way for both of us for a minute.
The double-edged sword of doing experiments like that, by just being like open to the outcome, we really didn't plan our next step after that. We had to like stop and figure out what was the next step and how to do it.
What now?
Yes. And like life got in the way, partially because we didn't have a contingency plan for if it turned out that way. We were just
if
like,
this goes well,
we'll just see.
It wasn't even,
Yes.
It's funny to think it wasn't even on our radar. We definitely didn't expect it to go as well as it did.
Yeah.
Anyway, so a year later.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do some more.
Yes.
Like, I've got this book. I've got to put my money where my mouth's at.
That's
I've
right.
got to actually have songs to show people because in the book I talk about them.
So we picked 5 more.
We picked 5 more and we recorded those too.
Yes, with a different producer.
Different producer because the first producer was kind of busy.
Being on The Voice. No big deal. We may be interviewing him pretty soon, which is exciting. We loved working with our new producer and we've been able to put it all together.
Yeah, we're super stoked about it.
That's our scary thing, and that's where we're at with it now. And that kind of feels like the end of the chapter, but we're really still right in the thick of it, and we're still experimenting. Okay, we're about to release this music, but that's going to be another, like, now what moment. And so doing, this podcast is not, we did our thing and checked our boxes and signed off on that. So now we're just going to talk about everybody else's scary thing because we don't do that anymore. We already did our time. No, this is an ongoing thing for both of us.
Yeah, well, and that's a whole other can of worms, but our friends who've been in the music industry for a decade would tell you, like, for the most part, the challenges are still the same. You know, there might be a little bit greater rewards here and there.
It's just not their first rodeo.
It's like a day-to-day of, like, what am I doing now,
Yeah.
And I think, and I know we keep referring to music because that's our thing, but we really do want it to be really universal and really open to all career paths because I really do believe there's a lot of similarities that not everybody thinks about or talks about.
Sure.
And they don't go away, the day you get the job. They don't go away the day you finish a project. We're in this for the long haul, and we want to kind of experience life with everybody else that's out there trying too.
Definitely. So consider this your invitation.
So that's it. That's our big announcement. We're going to be releasing our album by the end of this year. And of course, we'll keep you informed on that. But even sooner, we're going to be releasing our first single from that album next week.
So make sure that you tune in next week because you'll hear it first.
So this is our scary thing. This has been really vulnerable to share and to talk about and even to know where to begin with all of that. But we also realize this is the first step in encouraging other people to do things that are scary for them. That first we have to share what's scary for us. And so we hope with this podcast that we'll continue to build a community of people encouraging others to do things that seem hard at first, that might not come naturally at first, but that are going to really bring a lot of joy into each other's lives. So that's our hope with the podcast. And we're excited to share our album with you soon.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. If you like what you've heard today, please take a second to leave us a review on iTunes. Remember to tune in next week when we'll be releasing our first single, Collide. We'll tell you all about it from conception to release. But yeah, it's a thing.
But yeah.
But yeah.
Is that grammatically correct?